Beyond the Gates spoilers teased that the shocking presence of Allison, the notorious prisoner whose name had already been etched in Chelsea's nightmares, inadvertently transformed a routine livestream into an unprecedented success. The launch of Chelseakat, a handbag line that Chelsea had poured her spirit into, was meant to be her comeback moment, a reclamation of confidence after years of fear. What no one anticipated was that Allison, whose violent past still lingered in whispers around town, would play a role that boosted the very sales Chelsea and her friends dreamed of achieving. Kat, Chelsea, and Samantha were prepared for the night with meticulous rehearsals, seamless coordination, and a unified energy that radiated across the camera lens. Their banter was lighthearted, their demonstrations persuasive, and the bags themselves shimmered with carefully designed appeal. Yet behind the slick marketing veneer, tension quietly brewed the moment Allison tricked a distracted officer into lending her a phone under the pretense of calling her wife. That single maneuver brought chaos lurking on the edges of triumph. For Chelsea, the unexpected voice of Allison cutting into the feed was like the past resurrected. Her body tensed, her mind momentarily jolted back into the claustrophobic dread of being held captive, tied to the shadows of fear she thought she had buried. And yet, unlike the trembling girl who once flinched at Allison's gaze, Chelsea did not break. She steadied her breathing, adjusted her tone, and forced herself to continue the pitch as though nothing had gone wrong. The duality of her actions astonished even her closest allies. Outwardly calm, inwardly trembling, she anchored herself with the thought that every second of composure meant more orders flooding in, more validation that she was not just a survivor, but a creator. The live stream turned into an event no one could stop talking about. What began as a straightforward launch mutated into something like a spectacle, blending commerce, danger, and drama. Viewers commented furiously, sharing clips and reactions in real time, pushing Chelseakat's handbags into viral territory. Kat's enthusiasm meshed perfectly with Chelsea's newfound steadiness, while Samantha filled gaps with her sharp commentary, ensuring no silence lasted long enough for panic to sink in. The handbags themselves seemed almost secondary to the spectacle of Chelsea standing tall against the ghost of her trauma. Orders skyrocketed, numbers climbing higher than projections could have ever dared to predict. Later, when Chelsea finally allowed herself to exhale, she felt the weight of what had transpired. She was not merely celebrating the birth of a brand, she was confronting a fear that had haunted her for years. She remembered nights lying awake, replaying Allison's voice in her mind, flinching at shadows, doubting her strength. Yet now she had faced Allison indirectly and endured without grumbling. That subtle but undeniable victory set off a spark inside her. She realized that strength was not the absence of fear, but the ability to move forward while still carrying it. It was in the quiet after the storm that Chelsea recalled the voice of her grandmother, whose advice had first planted the seed of this handbag venture. The old woman had often told her that the world responded to resilience, that people were drawn not just to products but to stories of survival and transformation. That advice had sounded sentimental once, but now it proved prophetic. Chelsea's handbags were not merely leather and stitch. She carried the essence of a woman who had risen from the darkest moments and crafted beauty out of brokenness. Chelsea soon invited Samantha to meet Alexandria Alii, a renowned manufacturer with an eye for potential. Alexandria was known in the fashion industry for her sharp instincts and her ability to spot rising brands before they peaked. When Chelsea laid out her vision and presented the sketches, samples, and the avalanche of pre-orders from the viral launch, Alexandria's expression shifted from curiosity to conviction. She proposed an idea that turned the tide from hopeful beginnings into scalable success: pre-orders for the upcoming collection. The suggestion ignited immediate excitement in Chelsea and Kat, because it meant stability, momentum, and a foothold in a notoriously volatile market. The room vibrated with energy as they discussed possibilities. Samantha, always the realist of the group, asked the right questions about logistics and timelines, ensuring they didn't get carried away by enthusiasm. Kat scribbled notes furiously, mapping strategies in the margins. Chelsea listened, nodded, and contributed with a steady stream of ideas she never would have dared to voice months earlier. The dynamic between them had shifted. Chelsea was no longer just leaning on her friends for strength, she was leading. News of the success traveled quickly. Local blogs, fashion influencers, and even mainstream outlets began reporting on Chelseakat, framing it as a story of resilience and triumph. Chelsea herself became a symbol, not just an entrepreneur but an emblem of turning pain into purpose. It was inevitable, then, that Kat and Samantha insisted on celebrating. They proposed a small but meaningful party, not for the brand alone but for Chelsea personally, recognizing how far she had come since Alison's shadow first consumed her. That night, surrounded by clinking glasses, laughter, and music, Chelsea let herself bask in joy without suspicion. She stood between her two closest allies, both of whom reminded her that she was more than the girl Alison had once tried to destroy. Samantha toasted to courage, Kat toasted to friendship, and Chelsea, though her voice cracked slightly, raised her glass to survival and reinvention. The words carried weight, and everyone felt the depth of their resonance. Yet beyond the celebration, in the cold confines of confinement, Alison was seething. News trickled into her cell, taunting her with the unintended consequence of her own actions. She had hoped to disrupt Chelsea, to unravel her live broadcast, perhaps to remind her of who truly held control. Instead, the world had twisted the narrative, turning Alison into nothing more than a background character in Chelsea's triumph. Worse, Chelsea's brand had flourished directly because of Alison's intrusion. That fact corroded her mind like acid. Alison's fury was not merely the rage of a failed attempt at control, it was the deep, primal anger of someone watching her influence evaporate. She replayed the incident over and over, trying to find cracks, trying to convince herself that Chelsea had faltered, that Chelsea had broken. But the evidence said otherwise. Chelsea had grown stronger. Chelsea had sold more. Chelsea had laughed with friends while Alison sat confined behind bars. The imbalance gnawed at her, spiraling into obsessive thoughts that she could not silence. Her lawyers whispered of mental health claims, of potential declarations that might shift her sentence into psychiatric care rather than prison. Rumors circulated about her instability, and Alison, cunning even in her unraveling, recognized the possibilities. If she could leverage the system, if she could step beyond the iron gates under the guise of treatment, then perhaps she could reclaim her grip on Chelsea's life. The thought metastasized into obsession, pushing her deeper into a labyrinth of schemes and fantasies. Meanwhile, Chelsea pressed forward, determined not to look back. She scheduled new designs, worked late into nights perfecting sketches, and consulted with Alexandria on scaling production. Yet even as her career soared, faint echoes of unease lingered. Every unfamiliar face in a crowd felt like a threat. She tried to dismiss it, telling herself that paranoia was natural after trauma. Still, the thought of Alison lingered, an invisible tether that refused to break. Friends noticed the tension creeping back. Kat reassured her with constant optimism, telling her that Alison's chapter was closed, that no system would ever allow her to return. Samantha was less certain. She spoke less of comfort and more of vigilance, advising Chelsea to prepare for all possibilities. Chelsea balanced between their perspectives, torn between hope and caution, but she refused to let fear dictate her path again. The handbags remained at the center of it all, not just as products but as symbols. Each launch felt like another brick laid in a fortress she was building around her independence. She poured stories into each collection, subtly weaving her narrative of overcoming into the marketing. Customers resonated with it, often writing in with messages about their own struggles and triumphs. Chelsea read them late at night, sometimes crying, sometimes smiling, always reminded that she was not alone in her journey. Yet as Chelsea's world brightened, Alison's darkened. Within the sterile walls where she was examined, her agitation intensified. Staff spoke cautiously about her condition, noting how often Chelsea's name surfaced in her rants, how fixated she became during therapy sessions, how the line between obsession and reality blurred dangerously. Whether Alison would be contained or released under medical supervision became a question that unsettled more than just Chelsea's circle. Light began to ripple outward, catching the attention of those who understood the fragile line between justice and madness. Chelsea's success grew steadily in the weeks following the launch, but so did the subtle unease threading through her days. Kat and Samantha worked tirelessly alongside her, their partnership evolving into something like a family. Kat, with her natural charisma and sharp eye for design presentation, became the public face of enthusiasm, her presence in every live broadcast injecting a dose of charm that drew viewers in. Samantha, precise and deliberate, grounded the team with structure, contracts, and deadlines, ensuring that creative ambition translated into practical results. Together they formed a triangle of balance: Chelsea's resilience and vision, Kat's magnetism, and Samantha's discipline. Yet beneath the surface, Chelsea felt the weight of anticipation. She woke in the middle of nights to silence so heavy that it pressed against her chest, reminding her of the quiet that used to fill the room when Allison would watch her without speaking. That kind of memory wasn't something she could dismiss with logic, it lived in her bones. Sometimes she found herself sketching designs so violently that the lines tore through the paper, as though she were trying to wrestle the fear into a shape she could control. Kat noticed the signs first. She brought it up during one of their late-night brainstorming sessions, asking Chelsea if she was sleeping enough, if she felt safe. Chelsea waved it off, insisting she was fine, that she didn't want to drag the weight of her past into the glow of her present. Samantha, however, was not convinced. She had been watching Chelsea just as closely, and the concern in her voice was sharper. "Allison isn't gone," she warned one evening after Kat left. "She's still out there, even if she's locked away. And the system isn't as strong as you think it is." The truth was that Allison's name never truly faded from conversation. Even if Chelsea tried to banish it, the media occasionally fanned the flames. Small news reports hinted at Allison's mental instability, whispers of her legal team maneuvering for her release into psychiatric care. Each article felt like a dart aimed at Chelsea's fragile sense of peace. Samantha clipped them and saved them, claiming Chelsea needed to know what could be coming. Kat, on the other hand, argued that feeding the fear gave Allison more power than she deserved. The two friends clashed quietly over how best to protect Chelsea, their contrasting strategies pulling them in different directions even as they both cared deeply. Meanwhile, Chelsea pressed harder into her work, as if productivity could drown out dread. She collaborated with Alexandria Alia more intensively, working through designs that embodied both strength and elegance. Alexandria, impressed with Chelsea's ability to fuse story with style, pushed her to expand. "You're not just selling handbags," Alexandria told her during one meeting. "You're selling resilience. People want to carry that with them, to feel like they, too, can hold the weight of survival with grace." The words resonated, fueling Chelsea's determination to keep moving forward. But while Chelsea's world spun with creative energy, Allison's obsession deepened. Confined yet cunning, she found ways to extract information through fragmented sources: snippets of television news, overheard staff conversations, glimpses of articles slipped through the cracks. Each piece became a thread in the web she wove around Chelsea in her mind. What drove her mad was not just the knowledge of Chelsea's success, but the fact that her own presence had fueled it. The woman she once believed she controlled had turned the tables, twisting trauma into triumph. That inversion was unbearable, and it planted in Allison a single goal: to reclaim her role, to reassert dominance, no matter the cost. As rumors about Allison's possible transfer to psychiatric care grew stronger, Samantha became increasingly vigilant. She insisted on private security for Chelsea, though Chelsea resisted the idea at first. "I don't want to live like I'm hiding," she said firmly. "If I let fear control me, then Allison still wins." But Samantha countered that it wasn't about hiding, it was about being prepared. Kat sided with Chelsea, urging her not to let paranoia choke the joy they had finally built. The disagreement created tension in their partnership, but it also revealed just how differently each of them perceived danger. The celebration party, once remembered as a night of triumph, began to feel like a fragile bubble in hindsight. Chelsea replayed it in her mind, clinging to the laughter and the clinking of glasses, as though holding on to a safe memory could shield her from darker ones. Yet that night also marked the turning point when Alison's obsession intensified, when Chelsea's story became not just one of survival but of looming confrontation. Alison's lawyers managed to secure her evaluation by a psychiatric panel. Though many argued that her crimes were too severe for leniency, there was also a growing narrative that she was unwell rather than strictly criminal. The possibility of her being relocated to a less secure facility introduced cracks into the walls Chelsea thought were impenetrable. Chelsea didn't follow the legal details at first, preferring to focus on her handbags, but Samantha did, and the look on her face whenever new information surfaced told Chelsea enough. Kat, meanwhile, tried to keep Chelsea's focus anchored on the positive. She threw herself into planning the next live stream, ensuring the sets were flawless, the lighting perfect, the energy contagious. She kept repeating that Alison's shadow didn't matter, that what mattered was the growing community of customers who believed in Chelseakat. Chelsea wanted to believe it too, but unease gnawed at her. One night, long after the others had gone home, Chelsea stayed alone in the studio sketching designs. The silence stretched so wide that she swore she heard footsteps echoing. Though she knew logically she was alone, she gripped her pencil tighter, heart racing, and whispered to herself that it was just her imagination. Still, she couldn't shake the sensation that Alison's presence lingered, like smoke seeping under a door. The handbags became Chelsea's language for everything she couldn't say out loud. One design was sharp and angular, almost weapon-like in its edges. Another was soft, rounded, stitched with threads that symbolized connection and healing. Each bag told a piece of her story, fragments of her psyche made tangible. Alexandria praised the work, recognizing that the authenticity gave the brand a soul most competitors lacked. But Chelsea sometimes wondered if she was pouring too much of herself into the products, leaving nothing hidden, nothing untouched by the shadow of Alison. Samantha eventually convinced Chelsea to accept minimal security measures, not out of fear but out of prudence. A guard was hired to stand watch during major events, and locks were reinforced at the studio. Chelsea felt conflicted, grateful for the protection, yet resentful that Alison's ghost still dictated parts of her life. Kat tried to ease the tension by making jokes, telling Chelsea that even the biggest fashion houses had security, so it wasn't fear, it was professionalism. Chelsea laughed, but deep down she knew the reason was Alison, and only Alison. As the next collection approached its release, Chelsea's anxiety heightened. She knew the attention would flare again, and with it, the possibility that Alison would find a way to intrude. Every time her phone buzzed with an unknown number, her chest tightened. Every time she walked outside, she scanned faces instinctively. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop. Trauma had trained her to be vigilant, and no amount of success could fully unteach that reflex. Then came the news that Alison's condition had officially been declared unstable enough for psychiatric care. The decision stunned Chelsea, Kat, and Samantha when they heard it. Samantha immediately voiced her outrage, insisting it was a loophole Alison had manipulated. Kat tried to stay optimistic, saying that psychiatric care was still a form of confinement, but even she couldn't mask her worry entirely. Chelsea sat quietly, the words echoing in her head like a sentence that hadn't finished being spoken. Psychiatric care meant a different environment, different restrictions, and perhaps different opportunities for Alison to slip through cracks. Chelsea wanted to scream, but instead she chose to work harder. She threw herself into preparing the pre-orders with Alexandria, ensuring every detail was flawless. If Alison returned, Chelsea wanted her to see not weakness but undeniable strength. It wasn't about handbags anymore, it was about survival reframed as victory. She told herself that no matter what Alison tried, she could not erase what Chelsea had built with Kat and Samantha. Still, Samantha's words lingered like a warning. Alison isn't gone. Chelsea could feel it too, as if the story between them was not finished, as if the gates separating past and present were still swinging open. And with each passing day, the sense grew stronger that Alison would not remain a shadow forever, but would step once more into the light of Chelsea's world, whether as a threat, a test, Or something even darker? The weeks after the announcement of Alison's transfer unfolded like a storm pressing against the horizon, visible, inevitable, and impossible to stop. Chelseakat and Samantha lived in a strange limbo where work thrived and tension simmered, where the success of Chelseakat felt brighter than ever and yet constantly shadowed by Alison's looming presence. Every headline, every whispered rumor about Alison's condition, stretched their nerves tighter. Chelsea forced herself into the role of leader more fiercely than before. She expanded her collaboration with Alexandria Alii, finalizing details for the next wave of pre-orders and securing international distributors. The numbers dazzled, profits multiplied, interest surged, and the brand began to cross borders into markets Chelsea once thought unreachable. Yet even in her moments of triumph, Chelsea felt the hollowness of celebration. She could not shake the certainty that Alison was working her way back into the world, that her obsession had not dulled but sharpened behind closed doors. Kat tried to smother the unease with optimism, pouring herself into promotion campaigns, booking photo shoots, and designing sets that would make every live stream unforgettable. She believed that if Chelsea kept her gaze forward, she could outrun the shadows. Samantha, however, refused to let her guard down. She tracked Alison's legal status obsessively, contacting lawyers, asking uncomfortable questions, and even warning Alexandria that extra security might soon be necessary. To Samantha, Alison's silence was not relief but preparation, and she wanted Chelsea ready when the silence broke. The silence did break abruptly, violently, one evening during a live stream that was meant to unveil Chelseakat's most ambitious collection yet. The handbags gleamed under studio lights, the broadcast reached record-breaking numbers, and Chelsea stood at the center, steady and radiant. Then came the disruption, a sudden message scrawled across the live chat from an anonymous account, words so personal and invasive that they could only belong to Alison. Chelsea froze. The words weren't just taunts, they referenced details from her captivity, fragments of conversations no one else could have known. Viewers initially thought it was staged drama, another twist in Chelseakat's viral story, but Chelsea knew instantly it was Alison. Somehow, from wherever she was being held, Alison had found a way to pierce the barrier and remind Chelsea that the connection between them had never been severed. Kat leapt into damage control mode, playing off the incident as a glitch while encouraging viewers to focus on the collection. Samantha moved swiftly behind the scenes, tracing the account, demanding the live stream be secured. Chelsea, trembling but refusing to grumble, lifted one of the handbags into the air and spoke with a voice steadier than she felt. "This," she said to the camera, "isn't just a bag. It's proof that no matter what tries to break you, you can carry on." The comment section erupted not with fear but with support, customers flooding in with orders as if their purchases were a declaration of solidarity. Yet when the live stream ended, Chelsea collapsed into tears. The truth was undeniable, Alison had breached her world again. And the message was clear: confinement hadn't silenced her, it had only intensified her obsession. The days that followed became a blur of preparation. Samantha insisted on new security protocols, hiring professionals to monitor both Chelsea's physical safety and her digital presence. Kat tried to restore a sense of normalcy, but even her optimism frayed under the weight of Alison's return. Chelsea herself oscillated between determination and dread. Some mornings she woke with fire in her chest, ready to prove that Alison no longer owned her story. Other mornings she felt the old fear crawl up her spine, whispering that no matter how high she climbed, Alison would always find a way to drag her back down. The breaking point came when Alison escaped. The details were murky. Reports conflicted about whether it was a lapse in supervision, a planned manipulation, or sheer chaos, but the result was the same: Alison was no longer contained. News spread like wildfire, and Chelsea felt the world tilt under her feet. The woman who had haunted her past was now free to carve herself into the present. Samantha responded first, her instincts sharp. She doubled security, alerted authorities, and stayed glued to her phone, ready to react to any sign of Alison's movements. Kat, though shaken, refused to let Chelsea crumble. "She wants you scared," Kat said firmly. "Don't give her that. You've already beaten her once." Chelsea listened, But inside she knew this would not end until Allison was confronted directly. The cycle had repeated too many times, each intrusion more invasive than the last. This was not just about survival anymore, it was about closure. The confrontation came on a night heavy with rain. Chelsea returned to the studio alone, determined to finish sketches she had been avoiding for weeks. She thought the quiet would give her clarity, but instead it gave Allison her opening. The sound of the door creaking open, the slow, deliberate footsteps Chelsea knew before she turned who it was. Allison stood there, drenched from the storm, eyes wild but focused, a ghost made flesh. For a moment, the world shrank to just the two of them, the captor and the survivor, bound by a twisted history neither had chosen but both had endured. Allison's voice was low, almost calm, as she told Chelsea that everything she had built was hers, that Chelsea's success existed only because of her. But Chelsea, though her heart pounded, stood tall. "You don't own me," she said, her voice steady. "You never did." The confrontation spiraled into chaos. Shouts, a struggle, the sound of objects crashing to the floor. But this time Chelsea was not alone. Kat and Samantha, alerted by Chelsea's failure to check in, arrived with security close behind. The studio filled with voices, movement, and the weight of intervention. Allison fought, unhinged and relentless, but the balance had shifted. Chelsea was no longer the isolated victim. She was surrounded by allies, by proof of the life she had rebuilt. When Allison was finally restrained and taken away, Chelsea sank to the floor, trembling but unbroken. Tears streamed down her face, but they were not just from fear, they were from release. The cycle had ended. The gates Allison kept forcing open were now closing, not because Chelsea had hidden from them, but because she had faced them head-on and refused to be consumed.